Today's topic is punctuation, specifically the em dash. If you've got 5 minutes, I've got 5 tips to help you improve your use of this really useful punctuation mark. It's been a while since my last set of tips on how to avoid punctuation errors that drive editors crazy. And there are more, though, that drive them cross-eyed, and one of them is the errors in the use of the punctuation mark, the em dash. Now, do you know what it is? If you do, that's terrific. But if you know what it is, do you know how to use it? And if you don't know what it is, you're kind of missing out on a really terrific punctuation mark that, if used correctly, can make a lot of difference in your writing. The em dash happens to be one of the punctuation marks that I like the best. I don't know, is it possible to have a favorite punctuation mark? Well, if it is, this is mine. But before I get to my 5 tips, I want to differentiate among 3 different kinds of punctuation marks that are almost always used incorrectly. Never mistake an em dash for the shorter en dash or the even shorter hyphen. Okay, now let's get to my 5 tips. Tip number 1, use them in place of commas. You can use a pair of em dashes in place of commas to enhance readability of a passage. One of the things you need to know about them, though, is that they give more emphasis to that material that would normally be between those 2 commas. And if you want that emphasized, then use the em dash. Here's an example. First with commas. When he finally decided to ask her out, which he planned to do after school, he began to sweat. The second one is more emphatic and easier to read. When he finally decided to ask her out, which he planned to do after school, he began to sweat. You can see that the em dashes set it off more and make it stand out more, so it emphasizes it more. Tip number 2, use them to replace parentheses. Em dashes are actually considered to be less formal than parentheses, but they have a couple of other little interesting aspects as well. If you really want to draw attention to the parenthetical material, then use the dashes instead of the parentheses. But if you want that parenthetical material to be more subtle, stick to the parentheses. Here are some examples. She had called me Franny, never Frances as my parents did, when I was younger, but had started calling me Fran now that I was older. If you want to make that slightly less formal, use the em dashes. She had called me Franny, never Frances as my parents did when I was younger, but had started calling me Fran now that I was older. You can change the emphasis and the readability and the way people read it and hear it in their minds when they're reading your work just by changing the punctuation. Tip number 3. Use them at the end of a sentence for emphasis. But if you use it at the end of a sentence for emphasis in place of a colon, which you would normally use, it's less formal, but it's much more emphatic. Look at this example. She knew just who was at her door, the police. She knew just who was at her door, the police. By using the em dash instead of the colon at the end, you've really emphasized the police. Tip number 4, make sure you know how to insert spaces before and after an em dash. Now, what I mean to say is if you're reading a passage in a newspaper, a journalistic piece, you'll notice that there are spaces before and after the em dash, always. This is based on, in the United States, AP style, and in Canada, CP style books. But if it's not journalistic writing that you're doing, then there are no spaces. There should be no space on either end of the em dash between the words. Tip number 5, make sure you know how to make an em dash on your computer program that you're using, your word processing, whether you're using MS Word or something else. It's not as simple as it sounds. Oftentimes people will use a hyphen in place of an em dash, which is wrong, simply because it's easier to put in a hyphen because it's right there on your keyboard. You're going to have to do a little bit of research on this one to figure out how to do it. One of the fallbacks you can always rely on is to insert a symbol, because when you look at symbols, you'll find that there are little dashes of 3 different lengths. So you can always do that if necessary. But it's much easier if you create a keystroke. You're going to have to look it up, figure out how to do it. The bottom line is you should never use an emdash, which we'll talk about sometime, or a hyphen in place of the emdash where you want to use it. That's just wrong. And if you can't make a proper emdash, then fall back on parentheses, commas, and colons. Now I've got to go and edit a piece of my work. I just love those emdashes. Talk to you soon. Subscribe to Write, Fix, Repeat. And maybe I can help you improve your writing knowledge and skills. 5 tips at a time.